In the criminal justice system, sexually based offenses are considered especially heinous. In New York City, the dedicated detectives who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad known as the Special Victims Unit. These are their stories.
The charge is manslaughter in the first degree. How does the defendant plead?
The defendant pleads not guilty, Your Honor. The defense would like to make a motion that the defendant be set free on his own recognizance.
Your Honor, if it please the court...
Just a minute, Mr. Stone. Mr. Stollmeyer hasn't finished. Go ahead, Mr. Stollmeyer.
Your Honor, my client has no criminal record. He has obvious ties to the community. He's a well-respected and distinguished man.
Your Honor, this is a homicide of the most gruesome kind. We feel that bail is essential. We recommend $100,000.
Your Honor, Mr. Rothman presents no risk of flight. $100,000 is ridiculous.
Mr. Stone's recommendation is a little high, but this is a homicide. Bail is set at $50,000.
Yeah, right. Whatever.
Ben, are you purposely trying to make this unpleasant?
We trained you pretty well. How do you like working for the other side?
The pay's better. Is that your problem?
I just don't like the class of clients you keep. First drug dealers, now a murderer. You should really be more discriminating.
And you should be more discriminating filing charges of manslaughter 1. You haven't got a case, Ben. Those fingerprints could have been on the Polaroids months before Victor Moore died. Look, you can get the grand jury to indict a ham sandwich, but if you indict Rothman, you're crazy.
Your client's alibi has been refuted by his alibi's witness.
Elizabeth Hendrick made a mistake. I assure you she will tell the truth.
Eric will argue that Moore consented to being tortured, that he'd like to get beat up, but I can work around that.
You can consent to being tortured, but you can't consent to being murdered. But you still have to prove intent. Did we know Rothman wanted to hurt him?
We will.
Was Rothman absolutely at the scene?
The Polaroid is identical. Practically down to the shadows the ones the police photographers took.
That'll fly. I want to be clear about one thing. I don't care what consenting adults do in their bedrooms or elsewhere. That's their business. But Rothman's a public figure. He's a role model. And he has an obligation not to behave like this. And Hendricks, if she's involved, go after her. I'll back you up all the way. I don't even want a hint of a double standard for the rich.
We've got to put Rothman at the scene more convincingly.
Go back over the evidence. Tear his life apart until something turns up.
Grant him immunity and he'll testify against Hendrick.
If he pleads to manslaughter.
You can't convict him of manslaughter 1.
That's what juries are for, Eric.
My client is not compelled to rescue somebody who's risking their own life. You haven't got a case here, Ben.
I think your client's guilty of manslaughter.
You only want to indict because he's being hung in the press.
I want to know what happened. Somebody got very careless with a human life, Eric. Your client still has no alibi. Hendrick hasn't budged. You want to tell me about your relationship with her?
I've got nothing to say about Miss Hendrick.
Commissioner, you know what our prisons are like these days. You face going to one for a very long time. You want to go alone?
Miss Hendrick will do the right thing.
Let's go, Henry.
Forensics says the oil on the Polaroid is the same as on the right.
That should establish that the photograph was taken at the time Victor Moore died. This is going to be a pleasure. Tox report shows that Victor Moore had Quaaludes in his blood. If he was on Ludes, we're looking at diminished capacity. He was in no position to protect himself.
Time to put a little pressure on the commissioner.
Why not Hendricks? She was in charge. Rothman's the weak one.
Because the only pressure on Hendrick is Rothman.
That doesn't seem right.
Paul, we've got one murderer we can indict by a hair, and the other one we're not even close to.
Something's got to give.
Ben, we're ready to make a deal.
We're going to indict your client for manslaughter 1.
Unless you have something we don't know about. Do I have to make a discovery motion?
Victor Moore had quaaludes in his blood. A jury is not going to believe that he had the capacity to defend himself.
You still have to prove intent, and you can't.
Have a seat, Mr. Rothman. We were just discussing your state of mind when you killed Victor Moore.
I thought we're here to make a deal.
Henry, sit down and say nothing further. Look, no matter what you think my client was doing with Victor Moore, this was a man who begged to be hurt as part of a game. He was a masochist.
He didn't beg to die.
Look, I'll tell you what I'm going to tell the jury if there ever is one. Victor Moore committed suicide, and you can't prove that he didn't.
Try me.
Criminally negligent homicide. He gets 3 months maximum.
We stick with man 1. Your client rolls on Hendrick. I'll recommend him for minimum sentence. Your client's a cog. He's insignificant. I know Hendrick told him to do what he did. His mistake is he thinks she can still help him. This isn't about dirty pictures. This is about death. A crime's been committed and the guilty will pay. Deal or no deal.
Forget it.
Wait a minute. It wasn't me. She did order me to do it. I wanted to save him, but she wouldn't let me.
I guess you've got your deal.
You have 3 adults consenting to certain activities, games. One of them dies. Who's responsible?
You think it's Hendrix?
All I have is the uncorroborated testimony of an accomplice. I think in some third world shithole that gets you a conviction.
What about the pills?
Tough. If they're chemically the same, if an expert witness doesn't knock the toxicology. Circumstantial isn't the word for it. Try and the jury laughs on its way out.
There's no law against owning bondage leather.
There might be against what you do while you're wearing it.
Okay, so I sold Miss Hendricks some of their outfits. Is that a problem?
Did you ever hang out with her?
Are you out of your mind?
How well did you know Elizabeth Hendrick?
Look, I don't get close to the paying customers. They're all paying with 51 cards.
Kathy, a man is dead. This is about murder.
Okay. There's this club. It's called Club X. One where a lot of rich go. A girl named Celine runs it.
I can't discuss my customers with you. It's like a doctor-patient confidentiality. You can understand that.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Miss Celine, as legal advisor to the grand jury, I advise you that the law of the state of New York recognizes no such confidentiality, and I direct you, ma'am, to answer the question.
I run the place. I'm not responsible for what goes on in it.
You are under subpoena and under oath. You answer the questions or you go to jail. Your attorney will verify that for you. I ask you once again, was Miss Hendrick a dues-paying member of your club?
She was a member.
I'm sorry.
She was a member. She paid dues.
And what did she do when she was at your club?
She liked to have slaves.
And what did she do with her slaves?
She liked to watch things get a little out of control.
And on that evening, did you hurt Mr. Moore?
Miss Hendricks said to slap him on his legs and buttocks.
You slapped him with your hand.
Yes. No, I was wearing a glove.
Where was Mr. Moore when this was happening?
He was standing on a chair with a noose tied around his neck, trying to reach orgasm.
And did he?
No. He lifted his legs off the chair to tie in the noose and get the feeling of hanging. He accidentally kicked the chair over, I went to put it back, but Miss Hendrick ordered me not to.
Miss Hendricks told you to let Mr. Moore hang to death, and you did.
You have to understand. I had to do what she told me.
You had to do as she told you.
Yes. It was part of the game.
You know that Henry Rothman killed Victor Moore, don't you?
Yes, I'm afraid I do.
Understand, if you're effectively presenting your side, you clear yourself.
You'll grant me immunity, and then I'll testify against him.
I'm sorry, I can't do that.
That is what you are going to do, Mr. Stone.
You really think a grand jury will believe you're innocent?
You never know, Mr. Stone, do you? I'll beg immunity. I'll see you at the grand jury.
Did you give Mr. Rothman and the others any drugs?
Mr. Stone, that question has ugly implications.
I'm sorry. Could you help me rephrase it?
You asked me if I gave the men drugs. That implies I gave them illegal drugs. Mr. Rothman and Mr. Moore took drugs, but not because they got them from me.
I apologize if I offended you. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may proceed.
You were accustomed to playing games with Mr. Rothman, is that right?
Mr. Moore invited me to join him in what he called performance artwork. We were rehearsing with Mr. Rothman. We'd done this before and the men were never very good at it, so I was doing my best to help them. I left for a few minutes, and when I returned, I found Mr. Moore dead, and the chair several feet away. Mr. Rothman was on the floor sobbing and repeating, "I let him die." It was a terrible mistake made by incompetent men. I should have never left them alone.
You should never have left them alone. Does that mean you knew that Victor Moore might get hurt if you did?
I mean, I know that now that I should have never left them alone.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rothman has advised that his earlier testimony was incomplete and has asked for this opportunity to expand on it.
I lied this morning. I was solely responsible for Victor Moore's death. Miss Hendrick was not in the room at the time. I take full responsibility.
Did you have a conversation with Miss Hendrick during the lunch break?
Yes.
Did Miss Hendrick tell you to come back in here and change your testimony?
I killed Victor Moore.
Just like she ordered you to the night Victor Moore died.
Miss Hendrick had nothing to do with it.
Mr. Rothman, you realize that these statements will invalidate the plea bargain you entered into earlier.
Miss Hendrick had nothing to do with it.